Welcome. This is Gutted. Loaves, fishes, and being more than the sum of your parts. I'm Dr. Stacy Marquis, and today we continue our exploration of The Chosen with Scene 6 of Season 2, Episode 5. The title, Spirit. As we transition away from the camp and back to the Jordan River, the energy shifts. Jesus and John sit side by side. Two men carrying the same calling but in very different ways. John is already mid-sentence because he doesn't ease into conversations. He arrives in them, especially ones like this. He's laying out his reasoning, building his case for why he intends to confront Herod. Not casually, not symbolically, directly, publicly. Because for John, when something is wrong, you call it out. You don't wait. You don't circle it. You name it. If your identity is built around truth-telling, urgency can start to feel like integrity, and slowing down can feel like compromise. Jesus listens, but he doesn't match John's pace. Instead, he shifts the perspective. Yes, it's unlawful, but he's not orienting himself around the violation. He's orienting himself around something broader, something that's still unfolding. John hears him, but he doesn't agree. Because when you're focused on what's clearly wrong, anything less than direct confrontation can start to feel like dismissal. So he pushes it a bit, asking exactly which of the laws of Moses is Jesus willing to let slide. But this isn't really about the law. It's about trust. John is wondering whether or not Jesus experiences the same urgency that he does, the same need to act now. This is the first time we see Jesus in this type of conversation, one that isn't a teaching moment. There's no parable, no instruction, just movement back and forth, like two people who know each other well enough to stay in the tension without pulling away. John keeps building his argument. Rules matter. Their lives matter. Their choices matter. Yes, people pay attention to power. They always have. Because when someone sits at the top of a system, what they do doesn't stay contained. It spreads. It sets tone. It shapes what others believe is acceptable. And John refuses to look away from that. Herod isn't just another name in a line of rulers. He's one of them, which means in John's mind, he should be held to the same standard. And if no one else will say it, he will. There's something almost predictable about it. Not in a dismissive way, but in a patterned one. Some people are wired to step into confrontation, not because they enjoy conflict, but because silence feels heavier. Jesus watches him carefully, not correcting, not interrupting, just seeing him. Then he asks a rhetorical question. John does know what will happen if he does this, right? It's not so much a warning as an acknowledgement. John just shrugs, brushes it off. Because from his perspective, this is what his life looks like. Arrest isn't a threat, it's part of the daily rhythm. And when something becomes familiar enough, the body stops reacting to it as danger. It just becomes expected. This is how people acclimate to high-risk patterns without realizing it. What would alarm someone else starts to feel normal, necessary even. Think of people who jump out of perfectly good airplanes or off of cliffs with only a giant rubber band attached to their ankle. But Jesus doesn't laugh. He just holds the moment. And John, sensing that weight, shifts just slightly. He tries to reassure him, saying, he'll be fine. People believe in him. Some even think he's Elijah. Jesus smiles at that, not dismissing it, but gently redirecting it. Well, not the Elijah, but they both see the comparison. John is the one who prepares the way for the Messiah, the one who points forward, the one who doesn't actually get to stay in the process long enough to see the outcome. Then something in John shifts. The argument/debate softens into a question. Now that all of this is happening, why does it feel like Jesus is holding back? Why the quiet? Why the withdrawal after miracles? Why step away when everything is gaining momentum? Because from John's perspective, movement means progress. If something is real, you push it forward. But Jesus doesn't move faster. He reveals something personal, private. He needs space, solitude, time to prepare, not react, prepare. And that lands differently because for someone like John, preparation can feel like hesitation. He lives in the exact moment. What comes to mind gets spoken. What feels true gets declared. But Jesus builds differently, layered, intentional. He exercises a level of restraint, not from fear, but from awareness. They're both doing the same work. They're just moving at different speeds. And when two people care about the same thing but operate differently, it can start to feel like one of them is doing it wrong. Jesus, as he frequently does, uses humor to break the tension. He tells John he heard about that whole brood of vipers comment, and John predictably stands by it. It made the point. It got the Pharisees' attention and cut through the noise. But Jesus offers a different interpretation. He reminds John that when the language you use sounds like an attack on identity instead of behavior, people don't usually reflect, they defend. No one wants to be framed as someone who would kill their mother by eating their way from the inside out. Jesus is highlighting a predictable human behavior. When someone feels exposed, there is room for change. When they feel attacked, they close ranks. But John doubles down. He isn't interested in being liked. He's interested in being honest and direct. And from what he's heard about the things Jesus has been doing, he's also not too worried about being nice. Once again, Jesus doesn't argue. he moves the conversation towards something deeper. His ministry isn't about being nice. It's about being kind. And he's not avoiding conflict. He's moving with intention. As that message settles, so does their energy. The urgency drops out of the moment. And for the first time, they just sit, looking out over the water, letting the conversation breathe. Then, taking a deep breath, John says what's been sitting underneath everything. It's all becoming real. All the prophecies, all the stories they grew up hearing. And suddenly, this isn't about Herod or law or timing. It's about weight. Because it's one thing to talk about purpose, to preach it, to build your identity around it. It's another thing entirely when it starts happening. When the thing you've been preparing for is no longer in the future. It's the kind of realization that lands in the body before it ever makes sense in the mind. John says it feels heavy, and Jesus agrees. When John asks if he's ready, Jesus doesn't answer with certainty alone. He also answers with honesty. He's always ready to do what his Father asks of him, but that doesn't make it easy. And there it is, that quiet intersection between calling and cost. Because readiness doesn't cancel difficulty. You can be aligned and still feel the weight of what's ahead. John sees that, and something in him softens. The edge he came in with eases. Because now he's not debating a position. He's sitting with his cousin, another human being. He apologizes, not for what he said, but for how he said it, which is something we all recognize. We tend to press hardest in the places we feel safest. Not because we don't care, but because we do. John reminds Jesus of that their family, that his life has always been pointed in this direction. He knows his role. He's just struggling with the pace, which is yet another experience we all recognize more than we want to admit. Because waiting rarely feels purposeful from the inside. It feels like delay, like something is being held back, even when something is actually being built. Jesus doesn't correct him. He doesn't slow him down. He just acknowledges it, sees John. He names what John has already done and how faithfully he's done it. Even if John's been a little, unconventional along the way. John laughs because he knows it's true, and the tension dissolves. Not because everything is resolved, but because nothing needs to be. They sit together, looking out over the river. No urgency, no argument, just presence. And maybe that's why this lands so close to home. While some people struggle with purpose, most struggle with pace. Some push, some wait, some speak quickly. Some take time to prepare what they're going to say. And it's easy to assume that the other way is the wrong way, that faster means more faithful, or that slower means more thoughtful. But most of the time, It's just different wiring, different ways of carrying the same weight. So the question becomes less about who's right and more about what happens in the space between. Can connection hold when pace doesn't match? Can respect stay intact when methods differ? Can you sit next to someone without needing them to move the same way you do? Because sometimes the work isn't choosing the right speed. It's learning how to stay in the relationship while moving differently. And that is where something deeper starts to take shape. This is Gutted. Loaves, fishes, and being more than the sum of your parts.